review. Got it. This Zoom meeting presentation will be available on YouTube after the fact for anybody who needs to dip in and out or just review it. But yeah, let's introduce ourselves. Since the recording didn't start until right now, I'll repeat that we're from the Wetlands Conservancy. My name is Shay. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a land steward and also the volunteer coordinator for the Wetlands Conservancy. If you sign up for a survey and you decide to go out with us into the field, I'll be your guide for that time.
Yeah, and I'm Megan. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the stewardship director. And I used to lead these. Unfortunately, I don't get to go out as much anymore, but it's still something I love to do. And so I'll be spending more time in the office helping out. But I'm also happy to answer questions or chat with folks if you ever want to be in touch.
Yeah, Megan, with partners of ours, developed this protocol and brought this form of community science to the Wetlands Conservancy. So she's a really good resource to have with us on this presentation. Speaking of partners, here are some of our other partners. These are either organizations that also do amphibian or beaver surveys. We do beaver surveys too in the fall. There are other organizations with similar goals to ours. So that means things like clean water, sustainable energy, community building, habitat restoration, and preservation. Some of the organizations, particularly the City of Gresham, the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge, and Johnson Creek Watershed Council, are actively right now doing amphibian surveys with volunteers. Completing this training is following the same protocol as theirs. So if you complete this training, you're eligible to participate in their amphibian surveys too. And I'll share the contact information for the correct people so that you can branch out if you decide you want to do that. But yeah, some of the other organizations on here, they co-manage land with us, or they're directly supporting our work with funding or with promotion. And some are the recipients of the data that we're collecting and the reports that we create.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Shay, real quick, that it was actually Metro who they were like the original starters of this survey, work in the area, and then we've all kind of glommed on to that. Yeah, also your bar is showing again.
Yeah. So I'm going to hide that bar as many times as I need to. So whenever we're talking about our function as a land trust, land management, and the partners that we work with, we need to mention that as a land trust, like any other landowner, we have to grapple with the ethical conflicts that modern legal ownership entails. And that includes issues of accessibility, issues of trespassing, for example, often by people in economic crisis or mental crisis, or both, with nowhere else to go. And most importantly, the stolen and unceded ancestral lands rightfully belonging to Oregon's First Peoples. Owning land, which we do, is ethically dubious, and the conservation movement as a whole has perpetuated a lot of the same racist agendas, racist erasures as the dominant culture has, even when the conservation movement has been trying to stand in opposition to that culture or to those practices. So all that is to say that we're going to survey frogs and salamanders, and we know that frogs and salamanders are significant or scientifically significant creatures. The work that we do and the outcomes that we're trying to reach, they're based on science, and it's usually institutional, sort of rigorous science, but community science isn't rigorous institutional science, and that kind of science isn't the only way of knowing. There are many other ways of knowing, and Native people have been living in reciprocity with amphibians and other creatures in wetlands forever. There are Native origin stories, myths, and art pieces that feature frogs in particular. It's harder to find stuff about salamanders, but it's there. Plus, there's the living testament of Native people still alive and well on these lands today. In some tribes, frogs are considered medicinal animals with healing powers and the ability to bring rain. In others, they're associated with disease or bad luck. To some Northwest Coast people, frogs are associated with springtime and renewal, and that makes sense because this is when they're breeding, and this is when we see them the most. I wish I could share some of these origin stories and some of these meetings, but I'm not really the right person to do that. And it's really easy to get it wrong also. It's our role to amplify Native voices, not to replace them. And it's still really difficult to find information that's properly attributed and rooted in Native wisdom. So traditional ecological knowledge that Native people have is extremely important to all forms of land restoration. And we have a lot of work to do. That is the environmental movement in general and the Wetlands Conservancy in particular to Native relationship building and partnership. So we recommend that all people involved in environmental movements support tribal economies, support Native sovereignty, and support land back initiatives. Okay, so some of the reasons that surveys are important is because of the numbers and because of what it means to our restoration plans. We're going to talk about that, but surveying is really fun and cool. And wildlife surveys are some of the most immediate and rewarding ways that we get to bring people into wetlands, that we get people to connect with wetlands. We're basically going to go on a safari together, but it's free. And it's also, it's an act of public service to participate. We are going to see birds and fish and aquatic rodents and bugs and moss and nests and like rainbows and scat and bones and bunnies and deer and so much stuff out there. It's going to be really fun and hopefully you're going to enjoy it a lot. There's a lot of really important like climate change, political reasons that this work is important and that surveys are important. But we have to hold on to just the joy and the curiosity of being out in nature because without that, people get bored and they move on from wetlands. And so we really care about people caring about wetlands. So let's talk a little bit about wetlands. Wetlands, it's an ecotype, it's an environment. It's an in-between place with characteristics of both wet and dry land environments. Water settles, gathers, or stays near the surface of the soil in a wetland, but it doesn't stay at the same level all year round, and it doesn't collect enough to create the depth that you would need to make it a lake or a river. Wetlands have especially saturated soils, and so they attract plant communities that prefer wet roots, and those plant communities grow there. So together, the soil and the plants act as speed bumps on the highway of the water cycle. They slow down water as it flows over the land. The process prevents erosion and it allows water to soak in and filter through the land without bringing it to a full standstill. So this slowing function is crucial to water quality. Pollutants and sediments have a chance to settle out. They settle into the water and into the lower soil levels. Water is retained, and then that water is used by plants and animals in the area, slowly trickling down to replenish groundwater stores. Sometimes that's an aquifer, sometimes not. But basically gravity is constantly pulling down on water from the time it's in the atmosphere to the time it's in mountain regions, all the way down until the time it empties into the ocean. And wetlands are places where it can hang out and clarify before it reaches the ocean, and we can all use it. Here's a cute little diagram of how that functionality works. I just really want to stress that wetlands are extremely functional and their habitat. So they are a really beautiful and cheap alternative to a water quality treatment plant. And also tons and tons of things live there. 40% of all species live or breed in wetlands. And every kind of species visits them unless they live in the ocean or at the top of a mountain. And the ecosystem services that wetlands provide are somewhere in the department of $69,000 per square kilometer per year of benefits, if measuring things in that sort of way helps you understand what they're doing for us. All right, so why egg mass surveys in particular? Amphibians are indicator species, and an indicator species is an organism that reflects the condition of the environment around it. They're often the first in their ecosystem to be affected by a particular environmental change, such as climate change, warming, pollution, human development, and other environmental degradation. And amphibians are indicator species because their respiratory systems are in their skin. So they're doing direct gas exchange with the water around them, or the atmosphere around them, depending on their stage of development. And so they absorb toxins or salinity or alkalinity just like really quickly. And then the reproductive systems of organisms are often the first place that changes or disruptions or pollutants take effect. We've seen that in the human population with like chemical pollutants and toxins, particularly during wartime. So the egg masses are the results of their reproductive systems. So yeah, they're environmentally sensitive species. Their presence is a good sign. We are surveying for the amphibians that we are likely to find, and also a couple that are listed as species of interest by the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And we are interested in the population of these amphibians, but we can't really run around doing terrestrial surveys trying to catch them because the training for that is a lot harder. The execution of that is a lot more time consuming and less reliable. If we find an egg mass, it's staying in one place. We can track its development over time. A lot of these egg masses take multiple weeks to develop, and its presence indicates the existence in that area of 2 adults breeding amphibians. So that's part of the reason why we choose egg mass species. Terrestrial surveys are really cool, and we recommend that you do them if you get the opportunity. It's just not something that we can handle to get the numbers that we're looking for. Anything else? Oh, just amphibians are like the canaries in the coal mine of wetlands. They're the first to respond to changes. All right. This data is used for lots and lots of things. Particularly, we want to keep an eye on the impacts of our own actions. Restoration can often be a really disturbing process to a wetland. Dredging in particular, but even just tromping around. If we bring 20 people out into a wetland for a big time cleanup and we're hauling things that are buried under a foot of mud, we're going to really stir up a lot of turbidity. We're going to stir up chemicals that might have been dormant or just hidden. So whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's really large scale or even just small scale to try and rehabilitate a wetland, we want to keep an eye on how that's going and if it's impacting the amphibians first, because that means it's impacting everything. And then we're also keeping an eye on other forces that are not our own, like surrounding development. Whenever construction projects happen around wetlands, it can be really disruptive depending on what the erosion strategy is there. Just the elimination of porous surfaces around wetlands means more water is going through stormwater systems and into wetlands. So we're keeping an eye on ourselves, we're keeping an eye on our neighbors, and yeah, we're using those numbers to help us reach our goals. And then we also take the numbers, the data from these surveys, and we'll contribute them to larger data sets being held by organizations like OWEB or US Fish and Wildlife, for example. Here is just a quick look at some of the data that's been gathered. This is a project that Metro did back in 2002, where they restored hydrologic flow to some areas that were trying to become wetlands again, next, like to the left of the main channel that you see there. So they just tracked how much amphibian breeding they could see in that area over time. The panel on the left with the pink dots is the red-legged frog. The panel on the right with the orange dots is the Northwestern Salamander. And so there's a ton of breeding, and over time it changes. And so you get an idea of how the water is moving and how the amphibians are responding to that.
Shay, can I just jump into, I think a really interesting thing about this chart. So we don't actually, we don't GIS locate our masses. We just kind of go unit by unit. So we look at one whole thing. But the cool thing about looking at this is you can see how red-leggeds are found in different areas where compared to Northwestern salamanders. And so it's something that you'll see on surveys where there are some sites that are really great for certain amphibians and not so great for others. And there's some where we find all of them too. So it's just sort of an interesting thing to understand and to learn about what sites are great for the different amphibians.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like just because the sort of top basin area doesn't have any Northwest salamanders in it doesn't mean it's not good amphibian breeding habitat because the red-leggeds are there. All right. These are just some pictures of other amphibians that we don't survey for, but that are present in the Pacific Northwest and are really cool. You might have seen some of them out on forested walks because adult amphibians also or often spend their adult lives in forested uplands, hiding under woody debris or leaf duff. So we're not going to talk about them in depth, partially because I don't know a lot about them, except for this one main guy here in the middle. But there's an amphibian or a salamander called the Larch Mountain Salamander. There's so many very, very specific species to very, very specific ecozones that we have here. And we're only going to focus on 4 species, but highly encourage you to learn as much as you can about all the different kinds of amphibians that you might encounter. These are our target species. We've got the red-legged frog, the Pacific forest frog, Northwest salamander, and the Long Toed Salamander. And to the right of each of these names is an abbreviation for the Latin name. And that is the abbreviation or the acronym that you'll see on the data sheet. So it's not important that you memorize these acronyms. We're going to go over it all together in the field, in the moment, as many times as necessary. But we just wanted to give you a little preview. And it can be helpful to try and match, to like use a mnemonic to remember the acronym. For example, red-legged, our AAU is the only acronym that starts with an R, and red-legged also starts with an R. Same with Pacific forest frog, PSRE. Both of the salamanders start with A because that's the Latin for salamanders, ambystoma, but the Northwest salamander is the bigger salamander and it's got GR in its name, which is kind of like grande or kind of like grand, if that helps you to remember. And then AMMA is the long-toed salamander, and that's I don't have a mnemonic for that one, but that's the only one that's left. So the process of elimination can help there.
I would,
the,
can
yeah.
I chime in real quick? For the long-toed,
Yeah.
the name is, can you go back actually? It's macrodactyl. It's basically the Latin name means big fingers. Here we go, macrodactylum. So that's kind of how it's not really a good mnemonic, but it's just interesting to think about the Latin word means big fingers. And so
Yeah.
so macro,
it's like their like second toe. They've got 4 toes, and their second toe, which would maybe be their ring finger if they had 5, is longer than all their other toes. And so like in general, they like don't have big feet, but they've got that one special long toe. And I grew up learning that like if you had your second toe on your foot longer than your big toe, it was a sign of royalty. And so I think of long-toed salamanders as royal. All right, we are going to go to a little quick look at the data sheet. That's a data sheet. We still bring out paper data sheets with us into the field and fill them out by hand. If you are surveying with a different organization, particularly the Refuge, they're using Survey 123, and that has its benefits, and so does this. So this one requires no technological savvy. We just fill out the conditions of the day and where we are, who is there, what time is it, whether there's any special weather or anything special going on in the area. And then as we go through the survey, every time we encounter something that we confirm is an amphibian egg mass of note, we'll take down all of this information about it, and I will go into exactly what all of these letters mean in just a minute. But I wanted you to have this sort of image in your mind. Depending on how successful this survey is, or how, I should say, how much the amphibians in the area like it, we have filled out this sheet plus the entire back of it is the same grid, plus another sheet full of amphibian egg mass information. So sometimes we'll go through a whole survey and we don't find anything. And sometimes we have to use multiple sheets of paper. You never know what you're going to get. Okay, so we're going to go through what it's like to show up on a day that you've signed up to be on a survey. what it's like every step of the process. And the first step of the process is to look at your confirmation email, get the address of the meeting spot, get yourself some directions, and then fill out your packing list. We provide certain materials, particularly the waders. So if you don't own waders, that's no big deal. Those are provided. And we'll talk about sizing before the day of. But what we need you to show up with is like warm clothing to wear inside of waders, a raincoat probably, because it's going to be February and March in Oregon. We're very likely to run into rain. If you have thermal and or waterproof gloves, those can be very useful. Thermal socks you'll want, probably like really beefy socks, because the material of the boots attached to the waders is not thermal, and you're going to be in very, very cold water. So big beefy socks, and even a change of socks and or clothing in case you get wet. Same deal, you might want a towel, and then you also might want polarized sunglasses. Those are optional, but they can be really helpful. And you don't have to memorize this list. We're going to send out an individualized packing list for every single survey that you have RSVP'd to participate in, depending on what the weather looks like and also what the terrain looks like. We might need a couple of different things depending on what the day is. But the first step of the process is to gather all of your stuff, look up directions, and then get yourself to the meeting spot. So the meeting spot is going to look something like this. It's probably a parking lot, or it might be a cul-de-sac in a residential area, but you will see me standing there in front of my blue Subaru with the hatch popped. It's full of bins, it's full of gear. I'll probably have laid it all out in a line, and then you'll come gather your waders. We'll do some sizing, we'll do some comfort testing, and get to know each other a little bit. Surveys will usually have 5 to 6 people, depending on the terrain and how many people show up. Yeah, this is when we put on our waders and we practice moving around. If you haven't worn them before, it's no big deal. They're cumbersome, they limit your mobility, they're tricky, but it just takes practice. We'll discuss how to safely move through a wetland. We'll discuss the route for the day and what we're likely to encounter. Not every site has every species, so we'll talk about what we expect to find at the site. And then we will elect a couple of specialized functions. We need one person who has good handwriting and who's not super sensitive to the cold to take down the data, to do the recordings, to fill out that sheet as we all discuss what we're looking at together. So we need one person to hold that data sheet and to fill it out as we go. We need one person with good attention to detail and also a loud yelling voice to keep time, because this is a time constrained survey and we keep track of how many minutes or hours we spend with our eyes on the water versus how much time we just spend walking around. So we need a stopwatch keeper, we need a data keeper, and we need a map keeper, somebody with good spatial reasoning who can hold on to a paper map, which is an aerial shot of the area that we are surveying. And they'll make little Sharpie dots on the map depending on where we find certain species. We like to have, we don't take GIS points, but we like to have an idea of where we are finding things. So we will cover those specific roles, and then we'll also talk about just like what we're into, because chances are you're going to make a friend on this survey. The kind of people who show up to Amphibian survey in the rain and the cold in February are really interesting people with interesting hobbies. So if you are a mushroom hunter, if you're like a naturalist watercolor person, if you're a geocacher, or if you're a birder, we want to hear about that. And we want you to share the knowledge that you have as we go, because my skills in all of those departments could really stand to be improved. I would love to learn bird calls and mushroom identification, and I'm certain that a lot of the other people on the survey would too. So much of what I learn about species identification and ecosystem function comes from just knowledgeable people who show up and talk about their interests on surveys. All right, then once we've got all that settled, we're going to go straight into the field. This is an example of what it can look like. We'll be trying our best to move against the flow of water because we don't want to stir up a bunch of sediment and turbidity and then walk into that turbidity because it'll ruin our visibility. So it's not always possible depending on the access points to the different wetlands, but we do our best to move against the flow of water, and we move real slow. We'll want to get in formation, which means standing in a line about 6 feet apart, shoulder to shoulder. And then we will start moving in the same direction all at the same time, but not until the person holding the stopwatch checks in with everybody and then yells go. And then once they yell go, we'll all start moving really slowly and cautiously, trying to maximize our search area while also being safe. We always want to be able to hear and see each other so that we can yell about the data, but also so we can help each other if anybody gets stuck in the mud or just needs help with ID. So, okay, we are moving through the wetland and someone then yells stop because they see something. And I want everybody to just take a couple of seconds to look very closely at the surface of this water. There's plenty to see, but to the untrained eye, it might just look like a little marshy patch of pond. You can throw it in the chat if you know what you're looking at already. I can't see the chat, but guessing is highly encouraged. So
yeah, some folks are saying they see it or a few spots.
Cool.
Lots of
There's so much going on here. It looks like a super peaceful small chunk of water, but it's an egg mass bonanza. There is a ton of breeding happening in this spot. Somebody loves this combination of depth and stillness and attachment material and sun exposure. Someone has chosen this as their desired breeding area. So if we get a closer look.
I'm gonna just chime in real quick. Is that I think most of those are red-legged.
Yeah, but you're not supposed to tell anybody yet.
Oh shoot, someone has asked.
That's okay. I feel like holding on to that information was only going to last another 10 seconds. Yeah. So once we get a closer look, it's a red-legged frog egg mass. We're going to show a whole bunch more pictures of all the different ways that they can look. But just to go back for a second, all of these little disturbances, bumpy areas on the surface of the water, each one is an egg mass that looks something like this. Red-leggeds in particular often are floating at the surface of the water, but the spot that an adult female chooses to lay may not stay at the surface. Each female chooses an attachment material, which could be like little pieces of grass, almost looks like straw in this picture, but they attach it to something so that it stays in that area for its full period of development, which could be up to like 45 days, depending on many factors. But during that time, wetland water levels are changing all the time. There could be storms, snow, rainfall, drought, anything that changes where the water level is. And all that stuff impacts the way that the egg masses look to a surveyor. This is the same kind of egg mass, but it's just covered in silt and sediment. And so at a distance, it kind of just looks like a billowing brown cloud. These are the adults of red-legged frogs. We are not very likely to see adults in the field. They're really good at hiding, and they also don't make any noise. They exclusively call underwater. So they're hard to come by, but it does happen every once in a while. They are red-legged frogs because they got little red legs. And they also have that sort of pronounced bump on the back of their body. I don't know what that's called. Some other frogs have it, but it looks really distinctive. They breed via external fertilization. So that means that the male grasps the female in a process called amplexus while the female is laying her eggs. And the male is fertilizing those eggs with a fluid containing sperm. And the female lays an egg mass like this, containing between 2,000 and 5,000 eggs, so that meaning embryos. You've got these little black dots, which are the embryos, and they have an individual layer of jelly around them. And then there's a mass of jelly around the whole thing. These eggs are going to hatch. We'll get to this, but these eggs are going to hatch in about 4 to 7 weeks, and then they're going to develop into adult frogs about 11 to 14 weeks after that. And the red-legged frog is specifically cited as a species of interest by the Oregon Conservation Strategy. So Now that we have confirmed that this is a red-legged frog egg mass, the stopwatch is stopped, and we're going to continue to stop the search while we fill out this data sheet. The things that we want to know are the time on the stopwatch, what species is it? It is the red-legged frog, meaning RAAU, so you'll just circle that right here. We want to know the number of egg masses. I'm not going to go back in the slides, but there were 9 in the image that we could see from a distance. It's possible there were more once you get in there and you really start looking, but let's say there were 9. And then we want to know what stage of development they're at. These letters mean round, tailed, or hatching. Hatching means that they're actively swimming away as tadpoles in the moment, which is very exciting when we get to see it. But you just circle one of those. All the embryos that we saw in those pictures were round. And then it wants to know what sort of material was the egg mass attached to. In most of those images, it looked like it was attached to pieces of vegetation. So these letters stand for grass, wood, other, or nothing. Nothing means free-floating egg mass. Maybe you found it washed up on the side, like on the bank of a stream, or maybe it's just actively floating through the water. But you just circle one of those, and we're not going to get really precious about species identification. Rushes technically are not grass. Blackberry canes technically are not grass, but they're vegetation. And so we just categorize them as grass. If you know specifically what the attachment material is, you can write that in the field notes, or anything else that's interesting about the egg mass. Like, so for example, down here, we say it's covered in sediment. That's a thing that could go in the field notes, especially if it means that you can't see what stage of development the embryos are inside. And then the last thing.
Shay, can I jump in real quick? One thing that helps
Yeah.
me is instead of saying grass or wood, I just think grassy or woody. So if it's a grassy material, you can put grass. If it's a woody material, if it's more stiff, you put wood.
Absolutely. You could also do, well, I don't know if this actually works, but G could stand for green because it's like green veg, but a lot of the vegetation at this time of year is very brown. So that doesn't quite work. And then, oh yeah, water depth. We also don't get super precious about this. If it's at the surface, floating on the surface, it's 0. If it's within the first foot of water, it's within 1 foot, meaning this. And if it's more than 1 foot, it's more than 1 foot. We're not going to take a measuring stick and do centimeters or inches. We're just trying to get an idea of what sort of depth these particular breeding pairs prefer. All right, this is just a different look at the same species of egg mass. A lot of things are going on in this picture. This is the right size, the right location, the right shape for a red-legged frog egg mass, but it's the wrong color. And there are a number of reasons that could have happened. It's possible that this egg mass didn't get fertilized, and so these embryos came out unfertilized, and that would make them white. It's possible that when, or right after this egg mass was laid, the surface of the water froze over and killed the embryos, or anything that killed the embryos, whether it's exposure to something toxic or freezing, can turn them white like this. So we'll still take note and record that we found this egg mass because it still tells us important information about the presence of breeding adults. But in the notes section, you would say that this is non-viable. You're welcome to sort of theorize as to why that might be, especially if there was like a snowstorm the day before. But just keep taking a close look at this picture because there's a lot more going on here. There's another egg mass right here, which looks super tightly packed, super fresh, and nice and black. So these guys look like they're going to be just fine. It's possible that this was the same adult female. Maybe she knew that these weren't fertilized and she tried again, or maybe somebody else just saw that this was a little bit too high and was like, I'll choose the same spot, but a couple inches lower. So there's another red-legged right there. And then if you keep looking around, I want to point out that there are lots of things that look like eggs that aren't. There's this big glob of algae full of bubbles over here. Algae and bubbles account for so much of what we see out there. We're going to yell stop, thinking that we've found an egg mass, and then you'll stick your white spoon underneath it and realize that it is just a bunch of gunk, and that's totally fine. It happens to everybody. It really does look the same. And then if you've already spotted it and written it in the chat, wonderful. But we've also got an adult frog in this picture. Right over here, there's a red-legged frog with a really beautiful little foot, just checking out the scene. It's impossible to say whether she's the one who laid these eggs or whether she's just another person checking out the same spot. But it really does help us to confirm the identification of these egg masses, that there is a red-legged frog in the shot. There's so much to look at when you're out in the field.
A funny story, this shot was taken by someone that was working with Katie Weil from Metro, who does surveys, and so they sent this picture to Katie and said, what is this egg mass right there? And they were not, super trained, and all they saw was the white egg mass, and they didn't realize even that they had gotten the photo of the frog and the additional egg mass there. So you get used to looking for these kind of things, but it's also really easy to miss things too. Yeah,
it really is. And it's really lucky because I don't have any shots like this that have like viable, non-viable, and adults all in the same frame. All right, so moving right along. Okay, we've confirmed that it's a red-legged frog. We've filled out the data sheet. We're all on the same page. We're ready to keep going with our survey. So everybody gets back in formation to wherever they were standing before. They get a solid footing, and then timer yells go. And then somebody else yells stop. And they've got something in their spoon. So if you find something in your spoon and you don't know what it is, that's totally fine. You can describe it in detail to the person closest to you. You can consult a laminated series of pictures that we're going to bring along with us. You can bring it out with you for comparison, or you can just call somebody to come over. We can all come over, especially if it's the first one that we find on a survey. A lot of times everybody wants to huddle around and look at it together. It's really exciting. So just keep in mind that you'll have help. This is what that egg mass looks like if you look closer. And here is a really good demonstration of why it's helpful to bring polarized sunglasses. This glare, like this is a nice day, but all this reflection on the surface of the water makes it really hard to see what's going on inside. So this image is a little bit easier. If you've already identified this and written in the chat, great job. Here's another close-up look. This is showing us how different the egg mass can look at different stages of development. We've got round embryos over here, and over here, they've got tails. They're like little commas or little beams. They start to elongate the longer that they develop. And this is called a Northwestern salamander. So the Northwest salamander egg mass looks super duper different from the red-legged egg mass. It's in general like a little smaller, but like way more compact and firm. And you'll notice the embryos are hemisphered, meaning that they're half black, half tan. So that's really distinct to them. The size is like the size of a large piece of citrus, maybe a grapefruit. And sometimes the color of the jelly material will be a little bit green because the Northwest salamander egg masses have a symbiotic relationship with a particular kind of algae that can grow inside the jelly material and oxygenate the jelly material, which really helps the embryos to survive and thrive. I had a volunteer once who described this kind of egg mass as a disco ball, which I thought was really accurate and also fun. These guys are more likely to choose deeper water and also to choose harder attachment material. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's just been a trend that we've noticed over time. And they can also, because of how firm the egg mass is, they can withstand higher currents and sort of harsher conditions. So this is what the adult looks like. Northwest salamander has these really pronounced ridges all down its body that make it in my opinion, look really muscular. And then they've also got this big gland behind the eye, which is called a parotoid gland. And they can release like a mild toxin from that gland if they're threatened, which might explain some of their survival rates. They have better survival rates in areas where non-native predators like bullfrogs are introduced. And it might be because they've got that ability to secrete toxin. Some facts about the Northwest salamander are that metamorphosed forms, meaning adults, spend most of their lives in the subterranean environment and are rarely seen except for spring migrations, which is now, to breeding ponds. But that surface activity is mostly nocturnal. So they're moving at night, they're super good at hiding. I have personally never seen a Northwest salamander in the wild, but maybe this is the year. They shelter under woody debris, ground litter, and accumulated duff. They have internal fertilization, meaning that the female gets a spermatophore deposited by the male. So that's different than the red-leggeds we were talking about before. The fertilized female lays between 30 to 270 embryos per egg mass, and they usually only lay one egg mass per season. Those embryos take 2 to 8 weeks to hatch, depending on environmental factors like, salinity, alkalinity, sun exposure, temperature. And that's a little bit faster turnaround than the red-leggeds. A cool thing about these guys is they can spend multiple years as a tadpole, or in some cases, they just choose to stay in their aquatic form for their entire life. And so that feature, the retention of jejunal features as an adult, is called either pedomorphosis or neoteny. If anybody listening knows the word neoteny or neoteny and how to pronounce it, let me know. I only just learned it. But yeah, when they're staying in the water throughout their adult lives, they get as large as these adults do, but they grow legs and they reach adult size, but they retain their gills and their finned tails. So that's the Northwest salamander. And we want to take data on this species. So the stopwatch is still stopped. We'll record the time of the stopwatch. It is at the AMGR species. We only found one egg mass this time. It's depending on which example we use, it's got either round embryos or tailed embryos. If you find multiple egg masses, you can take multiple lines of data to describe what each egg mass is like and what it's attached to: grass, wood, other, or nothing, how deep in the water it is, and anything funky that's going on with that egg mass. So for example, you might note that it's totally exposed to the air if the water level changed a bunch and it's just suspended on its attachment material over the surface of the water. We want to hear about that in the notes. Just a note here to talk about how we're going to be starting and stopping the stopwatch all the time because there are barriers and obstacles we have to climb over. In this picture, we're like using a log to go to either side of a channel. We're going to stop to look at cool stuff along the way, like bones, sometimes dead things, sometimes living things. There's lots to look at. It's really fun. And just don't worry about distracting us, because we're here to see more than just egg masses, and we have plenty of time. Surveys can last up to 3 hours, depending on the terrain. So just a couple of other things that you might see along the way. And the longer we go without finding an egg mass, the more sort of desperate we start to get. And we might start finding things that are eggs, but that are not amphibian egg masses. This guy, for example, is super duper duper tiny, super itsy, and looks like it could be maybe an egg that belongs to an amphibian. And that's because it is. This is the egg of a rough-skinned newt. They lay individual eggs and they're like smaller than a pea. We start to find these when we are just trying so hard to find anything. And that's what the adult of a rough-skinned newt looks like. They are breeding at this time too. Rough-skinned newts you're very likely to have seen them, especially if you like to go on hikes in the woods, because they live their adult lives in the forested uplands. And they are doing their traveling back and forth from the wetlands to breed right now too. They are salamanders. All newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts. They're super duper cute. And while we don't recommend handling any amphibian with your bare hands because of that really sensitive respiratory system in the skin we mentioned earlier. People pick up newts sometimes, and their breeding style is really different than a lot of the amphibians we're talking about now. They form mating balls in the water, and we're very likely to see that while we're out at certain wetlands. So we will stop the stopwatch and watch because it's beautiful and it's adorable, and it's something you're unlikely to see if you're not spending time in a wetland.
Hey, Shay,
Yeah.
I have something that might be relevant right now. Someone was asking how to tell between male and female, and so Allison was asking this question, and my experience is it's pretty much impossible to do it in the field. There are
Do you
ways
mean
you can
newts?
tell for
Newts or
any
like anything?
for anything. Yeah, and generally females are larger, but I don't feel like there's any easy ways to tell that in the field, and a lot of times you have to compare right
Yeah.
next to each other. But there
Yeah.
are a different shape of their genital areas, but that also is kind of hard to do if we're just looking at one, from my understanding. Do you have any?
Yeah, I've never known. Just like depending on what stage of like how long they've been alive, they might be different sizes, just like what their life has been like. In general, yeah, especially with the red-legged frogs, the females are bigger. But like it's also just possible that you just get frogs of varying sizes because of what they've been eating and what their life has been like. So if there are more and better ways, that's something that I can look into and include in the follow-up email that we send. Or if somebody listening right now knows, throw it in the chat. If you know like more details on the genitalia of different amphibians. There's a couple of other things we're very likely to see out in the field that we're not surveying for, and that is bullfrogs, especially if you come on surveys later in the season, getting on towards April. We're likely to hear them. They make this very ridiculous little meep sound before they jump in the water. We're likely to see them. They're super huge. They eat everything. They eat the larval forms and even the adult forms of all of these kinds of egg masses. They're not from here, but they have made a really comfortable home here. So we're not going to take data on them, but it's kind of possible we might see some of their tadpoles out there, these gigantic, massive tadpoles. This is larger than any of the tadpoles we'd be looking for, and they can spend multiple seasons as a tadpole, kind of as long as they want to. So they can just keep getting bigger and eating everything. This is what their egg masses look like. It's really loose and I don't know, really viscous, very, very difficult to like handle or lift and see. So if we find that stuff, we're just going to leave it alone, but maybe we'll make a note of it in the field notes because bullfrogs can share habitat with native amphibians, but depending on other stressors and factors that they face in their environment, they can be really detrimental to native survival. One more thing that's not an amphibian egg mass, but that we're likely to find, especially if we're getting really desperate, are snail egg masses. And you can see the ridges on that person's finger. You can see how small that is. These guys are often on the underside of especially like long, broad leaves or any debris, sometimes wood that's left in a wetland. So if you find it, cool. We don't really need to write anything about it, but the embryos in there are so tiny, you're not likely to be able to see them with your naked eye. Snails are a really important part of the food chain. They're an important part of the wetland ecosystem. If we find adults, that would be adorable also. But yeah, if you find this little macaroni guy, that's not an amphibian, that's just a snail. So we're back on our survey. We are moving through the wetland. The person with the stopwatch has yelled go, and we're doing our best to be safe. Somebody sees something else, they yell stop. This one is another different species. You'll notice it's a lot smaller than the others we've been looking at. The little white thing underneath it is the lid of a yogurt container. So you can kind of use that for scale. The embryos are looking pretty tan, but they're not looking very hemisphered. The shape of the egg mass is pretty loose, pretty fluid. It's not firm. So this guy is a Pacific chorus frog. Pacific chorus frogs are also called tree frogs. You've probably seen them If you spend time outside, you've probably heard them. They're called chorus frogs because they make a lot of noise. This is another look, an up-close look at the egg mass. I would venture to guess that this guy is about the size of like a swollen cherry tomato. For scale, there's a quarter and a dime. The chorus frogs have a reproductive strategy. That means they lay a lot of egg masses, and they all often lay in the same place. Chorus frogs have a lot of group behavior, and so it's not always the case, but if you find one, chances are you're going to find a lot more really soon. That's what the adult looks like. You've very likely seen this guy somewhere wet. They've got that distinctive eye mask patterning on the side of them. They can have all kinds of different colors, usually green, sometimes brown, but like we've seen like oranges and purples and stuff. Not as bright as a poison dart frog, but whatever allows them to have camouflage. Let's see, the reproductive strategy is to reproduce as much as possible. They're not very picky. They use ditches, they use water quality facilities, they use puddles, and the egg masses are usually close together and prolific. They have a lot of movement quality to them. They sort of dance in the water. And like birds, chorus frogs have different calls for different occasions. These guys can produce up to 5 different types of calls depending on the situation and the season. There's terrestrial warning calls, territorial warning calls. There's group songs, mating calls, and there's also a release call. If a male accidentally mounts another male, there's a special call to be like, hey, good try, but no thank you. Here's a couple more pictures of those. So filling out data for Pacific chorus frogs is a little bit different. We just focus on the upper right-hand corner of the data sheet. These guys are not listed as species of interest or endangered or threatened. They're doing just fine in this environment, but they're still an important part of the ecosystem. So we still like to know about their breeding habits. We just don't take specific notes on the depth, the attachment material, and the stage of development. We just do a running tally as we go. And then at the end of the survey, we'll circle one of these guys to say whether all in all, we found less than 20, more than 20, or more than 100. So the person taking data will have a section of the sheet somewhere where they're just doing a running tally. As we go along, you'll notice that you're seeing Pacific chorus frogs. You'll count to maybe like 5 to 10, depending on how many you can keep in your mind at one time. And then you'll yell to the data keeper like, hey, I've got 10 Pacific chorus over here. They'll tally those down, and we'll all keep doing that throughout the survey. At the end, we'll get the total. Okay, we are at 11:02, which is great because there's only one more target species. And then we're just going to talk about equipment safety a little bit and then about how to sign up. So there's only one more target species. Some of you probably know what it is. If you don't, no big deal, about to tell you. We are moving through the wetland. We're being really cautious. We're using wader safety and walking sticks, and somebody finds the egg mass for a long-toed salamander. I don't know why I chose to show you the adult form of this before the egg mass, but here it is. These guys are the smaller salamanders, but they've got the long toes. You can kind of see right here. This is the long toe for which it's named. These guys are significantly smaller than the Northwestern Salamanders, and they'll sometimes have like a perfect yellow line along their back, but sometimes it's just sort of a collection of spots. They lay the smallest egg masses, and they're not the smallest bodied amphibian, but they're the smallest bodied salamander that we look at. This is what their egg mass look like. I would say it's very comparable in size to the tree frog, chorus frog egg mass, but the color is really different, and the number of embryos inside the egg mass is really different too. It has the fewest of the egg masses that we survey for. And they can also do a thing where they'll lay single eggs along a blade of grass or a piece of attachment material. I'll show you that one in a minute. The egg masses for the long toads usually contain 10 to 20 eggs, but smaller or larger clusters can be common. Excuse me. Just like the Pacific chorus frog, they've got loose movement quality. They dance around a lot. If you lift them out of the water, they drip and hang. They kind of look like snot. That's right here. These guys are very loose, not keeping their shape. Development time for these guys is like 2 to 5 weeks, so it's a pretty quick turnaround. depending on water temperature, sunlight, things like that. And they're not considered a threatened or a species of interest by the Oregon Conservation Strategy. So we do the same thing as we do with chorus frogs for these guys, where we're just keeping a tally. This is the version that can go straight down in a line. You don't see a lot of this, but it can happen. And then these guys are pretty far along in their development. You can kind of tell that their egg mass is looking old, a little bit haggard, starting to fall apart a little bit, get covered in sediment. So we'll keep a tally of those guys. Oh, and I want to mention, I should have mentioned this earlier, I think the hardest thing about taking data, the hardest thing about surveying is stopping. When we're taking data, when the time on the stopwatch is stopped, we really got to keep our eyes off of the water because we're keeping a close record of how long we spent actively searching. When we're keeping or taking data, we're not actively searching. So you got to look at the sky, you got to bring binoculars, look to the trees, look at other things. It's really exciting when someone finds an egg mass and you get even more motivated to find another one, but you'll get your chance. Just wait until we start the stopwatch again. This is advice that I need just as much as anybody else. Let's see. Hey, here is a little illustration of all the different egg masses at one time. I will have laminated copies of this and also of side-by-side actual photos. When we're out in the field, if you want to bring one of those with you on the survey, that's great, so that you could have a frame of reference. But yeah, we've got red-leggeds, Northwesterns, long toads, these are often black, and Pacific chorus frog egg masses. One more time to hide my floating meeting controls. Okay, gear and strategy, we are right on time, y'all. So just a couple notes about moving through wetlands safely, about wearing gear. You just want to be careful. If you're super duper used to it, awesome. If you're super duper used to wearing waders for fly fishing, for example, it's going to be really different because in fly fishing, you're often standing on hard surfaces and stones. In wetlands, your feet are sinking sometimes up to 2 feet into mud at a time. So you just want to always have your quick release buttons accessible. Your shoulder straps have quick release buttons so that you can just push them in. It's kind of like a seatbelt, they just fling off in case you need to make a quick evacuation out of your waders. Also be careful around different obstacles, especially sharp things. We've got like submerged metal fencing sometimes, T-bars, definitely a lot of blackberry and thorns. It's easy to pop a hole in a wader, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't, but it is. And if you do own your own waders, you are welcome to bring those with you as long as they are firm bottom waders. We don't allow the felt bottoms because they tend to transfer pathogens between water systems more than the firm bottom ones do. But we can provide isopropyl alcohol to sanitize your waders if you have the right kind in between watersheds, and we sanitize all the waders that we loan out in between every survey. That's a little bit more. One more image in defense of polarized lenses. We have a couple to loan out, but if you have some, bring them. It just really cuts the glare so you can see what you're looking at. This is really hard to pick out from this very shiny surface. So bring polarized lenses if you have them, but if it's raining, you're probably not going to be able to use them because they're going to get covered in rain. Some more wader safety, never wade alone. If you're signed up for a guided survey with us, you won't be alone. Wade gently, wade slowly, and notice if you feel unsteady. Nobody's going to leave you behind, and also everybody is in basically the same boat. We're all walking on this very muddy, uneven surface together. So just try and know your limits, ask for breaks if and when you need them, stay close to your buddy. If you get stuck, no big deal, everyone will help you. But if you get stuck and you notice that you're feeling a little panicky about it, that's also totally normal. Because you're wearing really constricting, cumbersome gear all over your body. It's heavy, the mud is taking you, and it can be difficult to get extricated. So yeah, try and practice regular, even breathing, just like be open with us about being nervous, and we can give you as much help as you want. Use a wading pole, meaning a walking stick, use a wading belt, those are provided. It's just a little band that you cinch around your waist to prevent water from going over the top of your waders really fast, if that happens. And we'll go over all of this stuff in the field. There's like a series of movements that can be really helpful towards getting unstuck that I will definitely demonstrate.
Shay, can I jump in real quick? And I'm sorry if I'm jumping the gun, but I would say that no one's been left behind. No one, but worst case scenario is sometimes, actually, I'm not sure, Shay, if you, I've never had to do this, but um, sometimes folks have I mean, like worst case scenario, you'd have to leave your waders behind and you could kind of crawl out of the mud, but I've never had to do that. I mean, I personally have gotten water in my waders several times. It's not very fun, but it's also, it's possible. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
why you keep
possible.
an extra pair of clothes in your car.
Definitely bring an extra pair of clothes, because whether like you rip a seam or you like run into some barbed wire and rip a hole, you'll end up with a big wet leg. And so you'll want to change your clothes once you get back into your car so that you're not sitting in that the whole way home. But also I have had people get stuck to the extent that they have to crawl out of their waders. That's happened 2 times. Each of those people had an incredible attitude, and that was great for them, but like that's not your responsibility. If that happens to you, you're welcome to be grumpy about it. And if that happens, like we'll probably just stop the survey right then and there, because you are going to have to walk back to the meeting place in socks, and it's just going to be gross, and you'll need support. So like I said, that's only happened to me 2 times in 5 years. It's very unlikely, but it's possible. And same deal with getting water so deep that it goes over the top of your waders. That's happened maybe like 4 or 5 times because someone fell sideways, not because they sunk so deep. Um, but a couple of tips are to stand with your feet slightly wider than your hips, knees slightly flexed. Know where you're stepping, meaning poke the ground with your walking stick before you take a step. Because even if you are the most agile, flexible, strong person in the world, if you fall in a hole, you're going to get super wet. And there are so many holes. Beavers are constantly digging channels that are like intentionally invisible to humans. And you might just lose 3 feet of height all of a sudden if you step into a beaver channel. So poke before you step with your walking stick. And if you do get stuck, just focus on extricating 1 foot at a time, because as you're putting weight on the other foot to release the stuck foot, that foot's going to start getting stuck too. And that's just what happens. You just got to rock back and forth, take a lot of deep breaths, hopefully hold on to somebody else's stick or hand to help pull you out. And it will probably take a while, and that's totally fine. I like to say, walk like a duck, get less stuck, meaning like point your feet slightly outward the way you were trained not to as a child, probably, because it can help you to maintain your balance. And also, if your foot starts to sink, it's nice to have it at an angle. It just helps to release it. Okay. All right. So we have arrived at the part of the training that is signing up for surveys. That process will go live tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's when we send out a follow-up email, including many, many helpful links from today's training. It will also include the entirety of today's training as a Zoom link and as a PowerPoint presentation. It will contain the waiver that you need to sign up to sign and return if you haven't worked with us before. But if you have worked with us before, sometime in the past 3 years, you don't need to fill out a new waiver. There is an access code that you'll need to get into the Sign Up Genius form. I will include that in the email, and that might be all. The sign up sheet looks like this. It is an almost, it's not an infinite scroll, but it's a long series of scrolls. There's 30 different events, 30 different days of surveys that you can sign up for. You can see the dates here, the time, they're all at 10 a.m. The time in the day here, the location is here, and there's a dropped pin in Google Maps that you can click on to see if it's an area that you care about, if it's close to you, if it's accessible to you. Most of these surveys are within walking distance of a bus line. And this area right here tells you how many slots are left, how many people have already signed up, and if there's space for you. And you can also choose to look at this as a grid, a calendar grid. I can't do that because this is a static image, but if that works better for your brain, that's an option. And then if you choose this day, then you would just push this button, say sign up. It'll open a little button on the bottom of the screen that says save and continue. I don't know why it does that, but that's the right thing to do. You press save and continue, and then it'll bring you to a new screen with all of the fields that you need to fill out, which are just your first and last name, and then your gendered boot size. So again, if you've surveyed with us a lot before, I probably already know your gendered boot size, but go ahead and include it again anyway. So for example, I'm a women's 8, so I would write W8 in that section, and that helps me to figure out what size waders to bring for you. If you're a half size, I'll probably bring the size above and below, because every wader, every chest wader pair is a different brand. And so it has different dimensions on the top, on the inseam, on the leg, and even in the shoulder straps. And some have pockets here and some don't. So it's good to have options. And also just like if your body type is different than what we think they probably were imagining when brands like Frog Togs and Outdoorsmen were designing these waders, they're mostly thinking of like men who want to go fly fishing. And that is not most of us. So if you're curvier on top, if you've got hips, if you've got like thick calves, for example, awesome, because it's going to be really helpful moving in the wetland, but also it might be challenging for fitting these waders. So just communicate with me about that in advance and I'll bring a lot of different options. That might be all that there is to say about signups. Oh,
Shay?
please, yeah.
Hey, shoot, I'm about to sneeze, but I just
Take your time.
I think I killed it. So 2 different questions. One is, can we get locations prior to sign up? Yeah, so those are listed, I think, in this location.
So if it's prior to sign up, then, I mean, that could just be an email that I send out today. That might be something specific or something I should send to everybody. But in general, almost everything is in Tualatin. We have one site that's in Hillsborough, one site that's in Gresham. But almost everything. Beaverton too, yeah. So things are generally in Washington counties on the west side. And then there are 2 sites on the east side. One is in Clackamas and one is in Gresham.
PCC Rock Creek campus is another site.
Yeah.
Are you always, yeah.
So is that technically a Washington County, Hillsborough?
Yeah, it's all Tualatin. Most of it's Tualatin Basin. Yeah, and then the other question is, what happens if the spots are all selected, but people still want to survey? And that's a great question. And I thought we should answer that.
Yeah, that's a super great question. So the math on this is that about 125 people signed up to participate in this training. And there are, let's see, there's 6 slots per day, and there are 30 days. So there is enough room for everybody definitely to sign up once. And we ask that nobody sign up more than 3 times. Also, just by the way, if anybody is participating in this training and they're like, I don't think I want to survey, that's totally fine. There's no requirement to survey for any number of days. And also, if you sign up and you participate in a survey and it's not for you, that's totally fine too. You can take your name off of any more that you may have signed up for. But what to do if you get to the sign up list and so many things are already filled and you don't get as many as you want or any, what to do then is to reach out to me, because I want to put you on the backup list for when people cancel. And also I want to put you in touch with the other organizations that are running amphibian surveys right now with volunteers. Completing this training means that you're eligible to participate with them, and that is the Tualatin Refuge and Johnson Creek Watershed Council. So there are other opportunities to survey with people other than us if you don't get any or as many surveys as you want. I think that's the answer to that question. Are we coming up on
one more question? Yeah. Do we have wading boots? I think we kind of answered this before, but yeah, we have wading boots for everyone. And as Shay was saying, depending on your own size dimensions, it can, waders were not designed for every person involved that wants to wear waders. So we can do our best, but if you're worried, if you have like really big calves or big belly, that can be something that could be a little bit harder to size. And so if you have any concerns, just talk to Shay. And, we're always looking to find better ways to get everyone out there. It's just that getting certain sizes that are, if it's not like a typical, like seriously, like the typical like male straight size, it's hard to find that that's not like $300 to $400 for a pair of waders. So we're doing our best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just in case you were asking about like boots as opposed to waders, so like the waders that we provide are all chest waders. And that's because we're not usually wading, you know, up to our rib cages, but we do occasionally have to cross deep channels to get from one area to the other. So we always want to be prepared to go in really deep. We also have hip waders, but we mostly don't bring those because of the reason I just mentioned. And we also have like tall knee boots that we sometimes lend out for other activities, other events. But for amphibian surveys, those are not adequate. The chest waders that we offer all have a firm bottom boot attached to the pant leg. So it's one unit. It's like an old timey or child's onesie from the tip of your toe to the sort of the top of your chest with suspenders that go over the top. It's all one piece to keep it waterproof.
Thanks, Shay. And I realized I misread this question from Paige. And so it sounds like Paige already has waders with attached boots, but she's not sure, or they're not sure if the boots are the right kind. And so I would say if the boots just look like a normal hiking boot, you're probably good to go. If there's a felt bottom, that's what we worry about, because that can it can keep diseases in there. So we don't use felt bottom boots for our surveys because that can transfer disease from site to site. If you have any more questions, you can just email Shay directly on that. Couple more questions I want to go over real quick, Shay, are
it's question time.
What's the difference, or one is how quickly do things fill up? And I'd say sometimes really quickly, and that's really unfortunate. I wish that we try to, you know, get everyone on a survey who wants to go on a survey, and that's why we ask folks to just sign up for 2 or 3 to start. But they can fill up within a day or two of us posting it, I think. So just be aware of that for sure. And then the difference between easy and difficult. Can you talk about that?
Pointing that out. Yeah, another section of this that I didn't mention was that the relative difficulty is listed next to each site. And that means how hard it is to move over the terrain. So Cedar Mill East, for example, that's our first available survey. That's this coming Thursday. It's one of our easier sites. There's one steep slope that we go down between the parking lot and the wetland, and that's about it. We don't have to like go over any big obstacles. And also the quality of the mud there in the areas that we're surveying is not really deep and sucking. I wish I had a better adjective, but in general, everybody has an okay time at Cedar Mill. And then Hedges East, for example, are listed as difficult. And that's not always the case, but it's been the case enough that it's worth being safe. That means that we're going to be walking over exposed mud sometimes in an undefined path or trail, because it's just sort of flat pond area. And it's unclear where there are deep channels and deep holes. And so people have gotten stuck there. Moving over that land is really slow. And so it kind of requires a core workout. You've got to really like engage your hip flexors, and you just got to be willing to work a little bit for that one. But it's worth it because there are ponds in the back right corner that usually have red-legged frog egg masses. It's a really nice payoff, but it's a lot of work. So the difficulty refers to the suckiness of the mud and the difficulty of the obstacles that we might come across. And I'll reiterate, wetlands change every single day. If it rained really hard the night before, the water levels are going to be high. And sometimes that makes things easier. Sometimes dried out land can be harder to move over. So I've just done my best to approximate what it's usually like there. Everybody is welcome to come to, there's no fitness test or anything like that. Only you can know what your body is capable of. So the hardest survey will involve going in and out of deep channels and sometimes getting stuck in deep mud.
Yeah, and Shay's great at accommodating folks. If you want to try a difficult one and you're not sure, I would just say go for it. You know, if you're up for the challenge, go for it. You know, if something goes a little bit wrong, you know, you all work together to figure it out. And
Also,
there's a lot of
get
times
out
there's
there.
options.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, a lot of times there's options to kind of like hang out on the side too. Like, you know, we can always Like we've even had folks go on surveys where they don't wear waders, they just wear boots, and they can hang out on the side and be a record keeper. You know, if you want to do that, let Shay know, because there are some sites that are more conducive to that than others.
Yeah. And also, if you get into it and it turns out to be harder than you were expecting, because the definition of difficult is super subjective, you can bail. That's totally fine. You are allowed to go at it for an hour and a half and say, okay, that's my limit, I'm hungry, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's raining really hard and you're just not into it. You're welcome to leave and go back to the cars and clean up and just leave your waders tucked under my car so that I can clean them and hang them up to dry. There's no penalty to anybody discovering that they want to leave early, or arriving late, or even canceling at the last minute. There's no penalty to that either. In volunteerism, it's super common. I would just ask that you do your best to communicate with me in advance, because I do pick up all the equipment the day before. So if we've got a last minute cancellation, I want to call the backup list and let somebody who really wants to be out on that survey know that there's a chance, and I want to have enough time to pick up gear that will fit them. So yeah, cancel, reschedule. Maybe you sign up for a survey that's happening in April, and then April rolls around and I send you a confirmation email and you're like, oh my God, I forgot all about that. No big deal. Just open communication is the best way to handle it. And we'll catch you next time. Got any other questions coming through?
Yeah, are you, can we just go for random questions in the chat
This
now?
is, yeah, all the questions time. The only other
Right,
slides
yeah.
are just like, hey, these are other people that you can
Great.
contact if you're interested in surveying. And then the last slide is just a bunch of pictures of frogs.
Awesome. So here's a good one. I wear glasses. What do you have advice for folks who wear glasses? I would say wear glasses if you have them.
Yeah.
And personally, I like can't see far away without glasses. And so I have polarized sunglasses that I got online for like $30. You also can take polarized glasses and put them over your glasses. So I wore like 2 sets of glasses at a time. But I would recommend bringing glasses. And I don't wear contacts. I don't know how to deal with that, but I'm sure that's easier. So
Yeah, I think wear contacts if you can, if you have them. But if you don't wear contacts, but you need glasses, no big deal. Just bring a wide brimmed hat. A wide brim hat is really helpful both to cut glare, and also if it starts to rain or even sprinkle, it can protect the surface of your glasses so you can actually see. And now that we're not wearing mandatory masks outdoors anymore, it's so much easier to get away with glasses. When we were doing masks, they would just fog up like crazy. And it was real hard for glasses wearers, but that time is now only optional. But on that note, if you or someone in your bubble is exhibiting any symptoms of any kind of illness on the day of the survey, or right before it, just let us know. Just cancel. Being sick on a survey is really unpleasant, and we don't want to expose anybody. So those are the COVID protocols in place now.
yeah, we don't require masks anymore. That's new. And then also, Fred mentioned, remember to enjoy yourself. I think that's great advice, because you're going to be out there with a bunch of folks who love being outside too, and can just nerd out with everybody else out there. If you have binoculars, when people have to yell stop and to record NEGMAS, it's a good time to pull your binoculars out, look for birds, and share information. It's like you're going to be with a bunch of nature lovers, so you can learn from each other. And Heather asked a good question. Can there be a wait list or on-call list for surveys that are full in case folks cancel? Yes, there is.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. If you already know, even before you get to the sign-up list, that you want to be on the on-call list, just email me and say that. I've got a running list of people. Some of them, just for full disclosure, sometimes I'll prioritize people who own waiters, because that means that they can show up in like 10 minutes notice. But if you want to be on that list, and especially if you want to be on that list regionally, like say you live in Gresham, you want to be on the Gresham contact list. If you live in Tigard, you want to be on the Tigard contact list. Just include those details, and you can let me know how you would like to be contacted, because I can call, email, or text you.
Yeah, another quick question too is, or just talking about like wet bags and stuff. I usually bring a backpack when I go on surveys, but I keep it empty, except for I put things in a dry bag inside my backpack. So I can wear a backpack with like a water bottle, and then in a little dry bag, it could even just be a Ziploc bag. You can put a snack, your phone, if you want to bring your phone, you don't have to. Car keys, that kind of stuff. Some of the waders do have little pouches, but just be careful and kind of take a look at how secure those pouches are. And then another good question that Shay, I hope you can answer, is talking about carpooling.
Yeah, carpooling. Carpooling we really weren't doing because of COVID, but I feel like we're back into the era of carpooling now. We recommend everybody be as safe as possible. We don't offer any transportation, but we are happy to connect people who are interested in carpooling. If that's you, email me and let me know. I can contact people who are showing up to the same survey as you and see if anybody is interested. Just, yeah, be careful, wear masks. And definitely, if you're carpooling with someone, definitely bring a towel because you don't want to get all wet and then sit on their car seat and get it wet too.
Yeah. And then another question is, are there other trainings that haven't happened this year yet? I don't, if a friend wants to come and join, I would say, I would just contact Shay about that, because this is a recorded survey training, so they could potentially just listen and watch to this training. It is, I think we do try to prioritize folks who've been to the training so everyone can get on a survey. But if there's extra room, that can be, that's it's okay.
Possible.
Yeah, it's
and
possible.
also if they watch the recorded version of this survey training, then they can also join one of the other organizations that has maybe room for surveyors that we don't. So again, that's Johnson Creek Watershed Council. The contact for Marley is right here. And also the Tualatin Hills or the Tualatin Refuge. The contacts for the refuge are here. I'll include those in the follow-up email. So yeah, just like branching out really increases your chances of getting on a survey. And also it increases your exposure to different lands. Johnson Creek is like all in the southeast. They're surveying different types of wetlands than we are. And the refuge is remote and beautiful and like full of ephemeral ponds that are full of Pacific chorus frogs. So the more the better.
Yeah. I think we might have gotten most of the questions, but I'm not sure if we skipped any. If you just want to chime in, feel free to do that too, or get in touch with either Shay or I after this.
Yeah, our doors are always open. You can always email with questions, even if they have nothing to do with frog or amphibian surveys. If you see something cool in a wetland and you just want to show us a picture of it, email me that too. I get to be in the field all the time, but there's so many places that I don't get to visit, so many things that I don't get to see, and we would love to learn about that and also share it on our promotional channels. On that note, we do take a lot of pictures out in the field. I took pictures of these people's butts when they were looking at something in the water. And if you don't want to have your picture taken, that's totally cool. It is, there's a photo release that's included in the waiver, so you sign that. And that protects us legally, but you're still allowed to say, like, don't take my picture. That's totally fine. We don't want to put your face or your butt on the internet without your consent. So please speak up about that, or please take a bunch of pictures, making sure to get consent from the folks you feature, and then put them on social media and tag Wetlands Conservancy, because there's only so much that we can share, but you can share as much as you'd like.
Yeah. I think that might be kind of it for now. I'm not seeing
Maybe that's the end.
come up. So.
Okay.
Do you have any last minute things?
I would say that, yeah, the sign up sheet goes live tomorrow at 10 a.m. The reason we chose to create like a big buffer window between the end of the survey and that time is because that's kind of how the national parks do it. They will say like, okay, this campground is going to like open at whatever 8 a.m. on this date, so everybody knows exactly when it's going to happen. Because I don't know how long it's going to take for me to like answer all these follow-up emails and also convert the recording into a YouTube link that is functional. So I just want everybody to be on the same page. Things might get competitive out there, and that's like ultimately a very, very good problem to have, because it means that people in the community are really stoked on amphibian surveys. One day in the future, we'll have like a a staff of 5 different volunteer coordinators going out on surveys all throughout the state. And the competition will dwindle. But until then, thank you for bearing with us. And just, yeah, reach out and let us know how things are going for you.
Yeah, and also if you want to come out on one survey and then just like, if you have wetlands that you have access to and you want to do a safe survey and just go out and see stuff, go for it, take pictures. And yeah, we can talk about how monitoring just any wetland or even water quality facility near your house can be helpful. There's not a perfect way to store data right now, but we know the folks who are trying to do the best at storing data. So if you're interested in doing that, that's great. It's just a cool skill to know. And then I know personally, every time I go out in the water at this time of year, you can just glance around and hopefully find something. So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for showing up, everybody. Everybody gets to go have a weekend now and hopefully go outside. It's a little dreary, but that doesn't mean you can't have fun out there.
Yeah, and quick, Allison was asking about water quality facilities. Can you ask them to, can you ask folks to go and survey those? I know that like Gresham, for example, I used to work there. They do actually a lot of like mass surveys in water quality facilities. And if you Allison, just get in touch with us and we can see if we know someone from your jurisdiction or wherever you want to go, and we might have an in for you to be able to go out and do that.
Yeah. On that note, be careful not to trespass when you are independently surveying. In addition to the safety measures you want to take about not waiting alone and like making sure you have proper attire, just like do your homework to check out who owns that land, because not everybody is on the same page about wanting people to tromp through their pond and look for egg masses. If you want to contact that landowner and talk to them about egg masses, great. But yeah, try and figure that out first.
Yeah, and then Shay Andrews asking about volunteer opportunities for data entry. Is that something that I know we've kind of tried to do that in the past. I feel like it's a maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not out of the question. We don't have the system in place to make that an efficient process, but maybe we could, and maybe that could free up a lot of my time. That's a great question. I will get back to you on that.
Yeah, maybe email Shay directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're not we're just outside people. Like I said, we're not always the best at organizing things, or we just do what we can, but there's usually better methods than we know about. Yeah. All right.
Maybe that's the end.
All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, like I'm just gonna put this all in Shay. Everyone email Shay if you have more questions.
Yeah, my email is the one that's in this slide right here. And also it is on the website, and also it is the one that's been emailing you a bunch, being like, hey, come to the Zoom training. So you can reply to those emails, or you can start new threads with me. Either way works. The first available survey time to sign up for is this coming Thursday, February 9th. It is in Beaverton/Cedar Mill, and then there will be surveys every Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday from now until April 13th.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording, and I think that we'll close this out, and hopefully you'll all see some egg masses soon.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. Thanks for your engagement.
All right. Thank you.